So in, junior high, I got one of like the earliest digital video cameras and was playing with that. And also since I was into computers, I'm like, oh, let's put the footage into the computer. This is back before iMovie even, I think, but, figuring out like, what can I do with it?
Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we are passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast in the summer of 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my friends, family, and social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. My goal was to do the same for my listeners, but as I chatted with my guests throughout the first year, I discovered that their personal stories were the most fascinating thing about each episode. Neil Gaiman says, fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. I now know that sharing our experiences with others helps us defeat our own dragons. It is our stories that connect us to one another. Let's see what wisdom today's guest has to share with us.
Today, I am interviewing or chatting with Gedaly Guberek, and this is episode 43. And Gedaly, I was looking at all the things you do, and I was like, oh my goodness, so many creative things. How do you keep up with it? So I wanted to ask first, though, about your filmmaking, and then I'm really interested in the working actor website. So, I mean, we can go from there because I'm also interested in the whole martial art thing. And so.
Oh, yeah, I do. I have a lot of different interests. I mean, they kind of all started at the same time, like I grew up watching classic comedy films like Marx Brothers and Charlie Chaplin and stuff like that. And, my dad was a fan of those. And I was also really into technology. And that led me to multiple things that I was doing. So in, junior high, I got, one of like the earliest digital video cameras and was playing with that. And also since I was into computers, I'm like, oh, let's put the footage into the computer. This is back before iMovie even, I think, but, figuring out like, what can I do with it? And that it kind of took off from there of being able to do both creative and technical things at the same time. So filmmaking really hit the spot for what I was interested in. And at the same time, developed a love for storytelling, and I was a big reader, and I was just a lot of things put together. So that led to doing a lot of that in high school, took a bit of a turn and did a bunch of theater after that. And then wound up in LA, and I'm like, oh, a lot of people are doing film here. I still want to do that. Let's do some film. So I've been making movies all this time.
Oh, that's really great. Now, do you have places where we can see them, or are they actually like in theaters, or were they in theaters, or are they on streaming services? Or
so I've been involved with a few different things. The projects that I was most closely involved with, or generated, produced, directed, whatever, are on my website. So that's a pretty good spot to get there. And that will link to YouTube or wherever the film is. There are others that have yet to be released, or ones that I'm working on now that are larger projects that are in the writing phase or the pre-production phase. So once those come out, I'll let you know.
So, and I saw that your brother Ruben's movie was called Burgled. Is that right? And it was at several is going to be at more film festivals. Is that right?
We directed that together. I wrote it, and then we directed together. And we're brothers. We're both filmmakers. We work together, and it helps a lot, especially because for that one I was on screen as well. It's hard to be in front and behind the camera at the same time. So having two minds, or I guess like one larger mind on both sides of the camera is helpful. I don't know what I would do if I couldn't do that, because then production would take twice as long in order for me to like do a take and watch it back. Did I do okay? And go back.
Oh, yes. Yeah, because I don't know. I think it would be hard to direct myself. I teach theater classes at Cochise College, and I've been involved in theater for a really long time, but I don't think I could direct myself. I'm not sure I'd be able to do that.
Yeah. I've done a lot of theater. I've directed some theater, and I'm basically morally opposed to someone directing themselves in theater. I've seen people do it unsuccessfully. I thought it was unsuccessful, but with film, it's like it's incredibly challenging, but you do have the ability to have people behind the camera, and you are recording yourself, so you can see it if you're doing a good job. So it's challenging, but I find it, I'm not opposed to it.
Well, and when you're doing that, do you like have help? Not critiquing maybe necessarily, but you've got the editors and or the second unit people or whatever it is helping you. Maybe they're saying, we need another take of that, or do you have that kind of thing going on?
Yeah. I mean, so for Burgled, for example, in which I was directing but also starring, my brother was directing, and he was watching monitor, and then we also had our director of photography, and then because that was an action film, that we had a action director, someone who's very experienced in the stunt world and action world, and was able to be there for the fight scenes and go like, no, that was good, that was not good. So yeah, there's definitely all sorts of help from all angles to make sure people who are looking at different aspects of it. Sometimes even on a larger set, if it like sometimes you have makeup, or if there's heavy makeup effects and stuff like that, it's going, nope, that makeup didn't work, I'll go in and fix it real fast. That kind of stuff. So film happens very quickly in a lot of ways, but it's also very iterative while it's being made. So the more collaboration, the better, especially when people are able to specialize. Like, I'm just looking at that person's hair. I'm just looking at how, if that person is, that punch to the face is actually reading to camera and looking realistic, things like that.
Yeah. And in theater, usually there's just one director. So, was that an action picture with martial arts? Because you said it was something that I read that you went to China and studied martial arts.
I did. So I started studying martial arts when I was about 9 years old. There was a kung fu studio nearby, and I've done it. I did that for several years, and then since then I've done it on and off, depending if I'm living close to a good place to study. Also, as I was studying as a kid, I got into kung fu movies.
Oh, right.
So the instructors would say, hey, check out this Jackie Chan movie, check out this Jet Li movie. And we'd go to, back in the day, Blockbuster or Hollywood Video and go through the entire martial arts section and rent those and just watch them all. And, I love the physicality and it's like, there are more examples in kind of American media today, but like back then it was like watching Cirque du Soleil for the first time, because American films, it's just these like it's Arnold Schwarzenegger like winding up and doing one big punch. But for kung fu movies, like it's a dance, it's like incredible athleticism and acrobatics, and it just it's a whole style unto itself, and it's so much fun. And the comedy, like it's physical comedy sometimes, and I love that. And as I was, in LA, and done some martial arts and was doing some stunt classes just because it was fun, fight choreography and that kind of stuff. I had this idea for a short film, and I'm like, oh, I want to do that. So that's kind of how Burgled came to be. And I'm like, I love kung fu, I love movie making, let's put them together. So that's kind of how that came around. And then, since I was into martial arts and kung fu, one of the goals, I think, of many kung fu students is like study at Shaolin Temple in China. It's it's kind of like the mecca of kung fu. It's it's in so many movies. It's like a legendary spot of this old monastery that Buddhist monastery that like monks started practicing martial arts thousands of years ago, and like all of these became the center for both spirituality and kung fu. And so that was one of those things on my list. I'm like, I want to do that someday. That sounds cool. And then something came across my feed for a teacher I followed, said, "Hey, I'm putting together a trip. Who wants to go?" And I'm like, me? Yeah, it was just like kind of fell into my lap. I'm like, well, I have to do this. I don't know if this opportunity is going to come up again. So yeah, we went to China and we're there for 10 days. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done and so much fun. If you're like, what we did there was basically train all day. We got up at 5 a.m. Training started at 5:30. We trained for like an hour and a half, then breakfast, then train for another 3 hours, and then lunch, then train, then nap, then lecture, then train, then dinner, then train, then sleep, then do it all over again.
Wow.
And it was insane. You know, people may be familiar with like the old stereotypes of like, you know, classical ballet training where they are really super intense with people. People who are familiar with like classical martial arts training will know that like it's, you know, you're not there in a class like, okay, let's do a couple moves like you would in like a kid's karate class. This is like, okay, you're going to squat down and stay there for an hour. And if you rise up an inch, I'm going to come make fun of you. Or, you know, in some parts of the world, they'll just hit you. But yeah, so it's very classical, like traditional training where we're doing that for 8-9 hours a day. And, you know, after day one, I was more sore than I think I'd ever been in my life. I could not move and, you know, rolled out of bed and was in pain. I'm like, oh no, I have to go down the stairs. Then I have to work out for another 8 hours today. How am I going to do that? And then somehow you do. It was one of those things where, you know, you don't think you have any gas left in the tank and you just go do it.
Yeah.
It was a very cool experience of like going further than you think you can. And, you know, being in a crazy environment with people who are there for the same reason. So yeah, and it was in just like being able to go to the temple and see what life is like for the monks there, for students in the schools around the area in the city. We hiked up the mountain that's behind the Shaolin temple there and got to like eat with the monks and hear them chanting at early morning one day. And it was just amazing and otherworldly. It's a really cool experience.
Oh, wow. That is cool. That sounds cool. So is Kung Fu the only martial art form that you practice?
I mean, Kung Fu is like has many different flavors. So I've done a few of them. So there's, you know, specifically Choi Lu Fut as a kid, and I did some Wing Chun. I've done some Tai Chi and things like that. And then of course the Shaolin styles in a couple of different places. I studied Taijutsu, which is a Japanese form of martial arts for a while. I did like a day of Muay Thai. I did fencing in college. So there's that. So I've done, you know, bits and pieces of stuff like that. I feel more like I've sampled stuff than gone super deep on one for all this time. But, you know, it's kind of me being a jack of all trades again. Although definitely when it comes to martial arts, master of none. Like I wouldn't consider myself like a master by any means, just heavily interested. So yeah, I love learning different styles. It's like learning different styles of dance. You know, there's a lot of commonalities, but there's these different flavors that are cool to experience.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That is cool. So one of the questions you had on your Podmatch profile page was ask who your favorite director is. And I was wondering if it's one of the directors of one of the martial arts movies that you watch.
Well, I've got a couple favorites, but definitely Jackie Chan is one of them. So yes, I think, you know, he's done incredible work for the last 50 years now. You know, so he's kind of set the standard that so many people look up to for action cinema, but just movies in general. Like that guy works. So and for people who are more familiar with his like films that have come out in America, go back and watch some of his Chinese films. Like Drunken Master and Drunken Master 2, the police story films. Like these are stunts that they won't let you do in the US. Like it's that kind of insane stuff with car chases and jumping off balconies and people, nearly dying. And like, you just know, because it was made in early 90s or early 80s, like they didn't fake any of that. Like what you see on camera is what you're getting. And it's really like the the bravery or maybe stupidity, I don't know, that went into it. Some of these stunts are just insane and they're fun. Like they're a good time. And I think, people who aren't familiar with that, even if you don't think it's your thing, like it's definitely something to appreciate.
Oh yeah. Well, I haven't seen very many Jackie Chan movies, but I have seen several Jet Li movies.
Nice.
Probably not any of the Chinese ones, but the ones that are made in the United States.
Yep.
He's a very interesting actor, I think. And of course, his martial arts style is really interesting too.
Absolutely.
So who's your other favorite director, or do you have more than one?
Charlie Chaplin.
Oh, Charlie Chaplin. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Early master of cinema. And it was just like I watched his movies as a kid and then continued to watch them as I got older. I'm like, no, that's still really good. It's one of those things like, Alfred Hitchcock would say things like pure cinema is stories that can be told purely visually. And that's like Chaplin came up in the silent film era and came from vaudeville before that. So he was like telling stories just with movement and then with camera and setting. And, even when sound became a thing, he didn't rely on that. And so, just the inventiveness of it, the attention to detail in a lot of his things, the humor is incredible because it's so universal, but also like the heart behind the movies is just incredibly powerful. Like while like City Lights and The Great Dictator are technically comedies, like you'll probably cry by the end. They're incredibly moving and really heartfelt and just pure emotion. And it's like like these are getting to be decades old now, almost 100 years old for some of them, but like, they still hold up. And I think that's that timelessness is just part of the like how core to like the human experience, which I think is incredible. So that's
really,
I'm really inspired by him.
Well, and I mean, I have seen some silent films that are kind of well, and it's probably because that was at the very, very beginning of the filmmaking industry, but he sort of streamlined it or perfected it, or it's something about the way I've only seen 3 or 4. The stories are better. Maybe that's what it is. And poignant. They're poignant.
Yeah.
And they don't hit you over the head with, this is the villain, or this is the, in fact, a lot of times there's not really a villain. It's just a story about some people and they're living their lives. And
absolutely. Yeah. It's really cool to see, especially like, because there are, if you look at other early film and, a lot of it's vignettes that are 5 to 15 minutes long, short films, basically. And, you're looking at it like, okay, this is funny, but it, there's not much story there. And where if you're able to look at, then Charlie Chaplin going into the feature films and those being extended stories, like the stories are really good. Like they were well written and it keeps you interested, and like the drama is there. It's able to sustain itself and has in that great visual comedy and in there as well. So they're really good.
Well, and I'm just thinking now, one of my dramatic structure students wanted to write about the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and I was watching it and it was like the camera moves are so Charlie Chaplin's camera work is steady. It's, it's not jerky, it's smooth, it's So that was another thing too. And I was wondering if there was maybe some advancement maybe with the cameras right before or during his time as a director.
Yeah, I mean, cameras, the technology has advanced a lot always, and it's made interesting differences in the storytelling because in at first cameras were just huge and bulky, and then they started to get smaller, a little more portable. They were able to figure out dolly systems to put cameras on tracks so they could do smooth movement and stuff like that. And so a lot of films started to put more movement in there. But then when sound came along, then they needed to worry about recording that as well, which weighed them down with equipment again. So suddenly a lot of pictures weren't moving the camera as much yet again.
Right.
So until later, when that technology was more figured out, then, in the later on in like the 70s, they had film cameras that started to get really portable again. And this is kind of where a lot of documentary filmmaking took off, because they were able to get onto the field with like these 16 millimeter cameras and stuff like that. And early filmmakers or filmmakers who were early in their career, like Martin Scorsese, were able to just do, true to life type stuff with that. And then of course, when we first went back to like when camera, or not first, but like when cameras started going digital in about 2002, like they had all these wires on them and stuff like that. So they couldn't move as much. So it's kind of been this cycle. Like we're now at a point again where digital cameras with really high quality are being used in professional, the largest films, and are tiny and are able to move around and mount them on people's heads and on cars and stuff like that. So it's kind of been the cycle of technology evolving and informing the storytelling, and then going back as we have a new technology, and then going forward again. So
because sometimes it makes for really interesting storytelling. Like I'm thinking of this, one of the movies I used to show in my dramatic structure class was Notorious, and it has that shot from the top of the balcony all the way down to Ingrid Bergman's hand when she's got the key in her hand. And that, I can't remember who developed that device so that they could do that long shot of going from one, from way high up to way down to her hand. So those kinds of things make movie history really interesting too. It's not just the acting or the writing or the directing, but the technology that they develop for certain things that they want to do. Yeah,
absolutely.
Oh wow, that's so great. So now talk about working actor. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, well, I'm an actor and have been for some time. And I was talking with a friend for a while, and we'd been in LA acting, and he's an actor and been on TV shows and things like that. And we were talking about the resources that are out there, and there's not a lot of good ones because for figuring out your career. The truth about most creative arts is that when you go to school, they'll tell you how to do the job. They'll teach you how to, figure out the craft. Like I know, like I went to school for theater. They teach you how to act in theater, but they don't really spend much time on how do I get a job as an actor. I can act, just how do I get the job? And, there used to be some resources around that on paper. In LA, a lot of actors would go to the Sam French bookshops and kind of talk to the people there and get these papers that like, here are some agents in town and stuff like that. But then the industry went digital. And of course, sadly, the Sam French bookshops are no longer. But basically, we set out to create, we wish we had 10 plus years ago, say hey, how do I become an actor? How do I get jobs as an actor? And, like figuring out how to get the best possible headshots, how to reach out and get an agent or a manager, and how to think of your career as a business rather than just something that you do, because, it's show business. It's not just show hobby.
Right.
So, it's you're a professional actor with an acting business in a freelance career that happens to be artistic. We, put our heads together and started building things. We wrote a bunch of guides, recorded some video courses that have dozens of lessons in there for, how to social media to promote yourself as an actor, or to develop relationships through it, how to get an agent or a manager, and then how to operate your business once you have them. Contrary to popular belief, once you have an agent or a manager, you haven't made it. There's still work to do. So put that together and got interviews with other professional actors and people in the industry, and, built a site where people could get the info they need and interact with the community and get feedback and stuff like that. So it's been a big project, but we're pretty happy with what we've built and are working on promoting it more so that we can help more people.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I'm going to have to put the link in my courses, because even though my team teacher is a professional actor, he's a professional director actor in the theater, and he has a lot of contacts and things, but this is nice to have some in the film side of it too. So, because some of my former students who live here do make their own films, and but they're living in Arizona, so they might want to make contacts with people in other places where closer to the movie industry. That's really great. Now, you also write. So do you write for television, film, or do you just write for your own projects?
Yeah, so mostly I've been writing for my own projects or projects I want to create myself. There are some larger projects I'm writing, some feature films and a TV series that, I'm like, I don't think I can, at least not right now, produce this myself. It would be a larger production. So if I could sell that or get it somewhere in the hands of someone who's capable of producing, great. But yeah, it's I guess a little all over the place of short films and some feature films that are lower budget that I am working on producing myself, or will in the near future, and then some big projects that are like, hey, I hope I can figure out an outlet for this at some point.
Yes.
I'd say my understanding of story structure lends itself best to feature films. Like I am writing one TV show, but most of my projects are movies, just because I feel like that, can I tell a complete story in 2 hours is a fun challenge for me. And I feel like I get it better. Whereas TV feels a little overwhelming, I guess, right now to me. But I'm still learning.
Yeah. I mean, each episode, you have to have the plot outline for each episode, but then, you have to kind of keep the big plot outline for the whole entire series too. And trying to keep track of that I would think that would be confusing.
Right. I mean, there's a reason that most TV shows are run by writers' rooms, where you have your showrunner being basically your chief storyteller, and then several writers in various positions being able to brainstorm it, all coming up with the outlines and then assigning them out to one or two writers to actually write it. So, it's a big undertaking. So you have a team to do it most of the time anyway.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yes. We've been listening to the podcast for Foundation, and I don't know. I'm such a slow writer. I don't think I would be able to do the writing in a writer's room. I don't. But it's interesting to hear them talk about, coming up with the big overall what's going to happen in the however many episodes they're hoping to have in Foundation. Right. And then how does this little episode fit into that bigger? It's interesting to follow that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have tremendous respect for actual professional TV writers who are turning out episodes in a week or two or less, depending on what's needed, of just writing really well, really fast. And I think that's
Really?
awesome. I don't know that I've developed that skill yet. I guess another reason why I lean towards feature films is because it's more iterative until we get it right, and then we produce it when we're ready versus needing to have the next episode ready next week. But there's exceptions to everything. But that just makes sense to me right now, and we'll see where that takes me.
And I would think that it would be in the film industry, it'd be similar to the theater industry, where the more contacts you make, the better it is. Dave, my team teacher, says theater is a microscopic industry in that you make a reputation for yourself and it travels across the country. Is it sort of that way in the film industry too?
It is. It's definitely, I mean, it's bigger, but it's also not, because there are, with, regional theater, for example, you've got your Shakespeare festivals and your regional theaters all over the place and people going between them. And for film, for the major productions, you're in fewer cities, but with more people. So it kind of depends. Like in general, it's bigger, but for specific departments, like for example, if like you're in the stunt industry, or if you're in, greensmen who are working on landscaping and stuff like that for sets, like those are pretty small pockets of people that tend to work on several jobs all over the place. So I think similarly for writers, at least staff writers who are on TV shows, because that's a small pool that's mostly in LA itself. But with production, happening all over the world now, like maybe it is expanding. Maybe it's not quite so small, but like in general, word travels fast. Your work does speak for you, so do good work and be kind. But it's a different world, but there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, right. So have you been acting on any television shows where we can see you?
Lately, I've been acting in my own stuff. I haven't actively been auditioning for things in a little while now, especially during lockdown. A couple auditions here and there, but mostly pursuing self-production. Like I'm writing for my own projects, I'm acting in my own projects, and I'm producing my own projects. And whatever else happens on the side, I'm perfectly happy with. But I have certain stories I want to bring to life right now, so I'm putting most of my effort into that.
I always ask this of writers. So do you have a job that you do on the side besides your writing? Because a lot of the writers say, well, writing is my real job, but working at Walmart is my side job.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, a life in the arts is a life of side gigs, side hustles, day jobs. Some of my friends call it a thrival job. It's not it's not what you do, but it's the job you do so that you can thrive in your artistic career.
Right. Yeah.
Rather than it being a survival job, which is a little more scarcity focused mindset, I guess. So yes, I have a thrival job. I've worked in marketing and tech and stuff like that here and there for a long time. So definitely helpful to have other skills. But, it's also some of these, I don't know, some companies I've worked for are a little more creative as well. So that helps. But I think the main thing is figuring out something you can do that will pay the bills and not drain you of your energy so that you still have room to be creative in the rest of the time. Because I've definitely done things that sap all my energy and, maybe I'm making ends meet, maybe I'm making more money, but I have no room to be creative and I have no mental energy to be creative, and that's not an effective job for an artist.
Right.
So that's its own challenge and own skill. And I think it's taken me a long time. I mean, I'm still figuring it out, but I've learned a lot of being able to like, what's important? What are my boundaries? What am I willing to do? What I'm not willing to do?
It's all part of the figuring that all out.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's always a lot to figure it out. And, even in those other environments that aren't artistic, necessarily. It's a good way to develop relationships with other people, figuring out project management, self-management, personal boundaries, picking up skills that may end up going into your writing. If you are working a boring corporate job and then you find yourself writing something that involves that, you have something to draw on.
That's true. Yeah.
I'm I think there's definitely some themes of that in my writing. Of a lot of my stories, even though they're about very different things, kind of have a core of someone who's trying to figure out how to do what they love for a living.
Yes.
But it's not, I'm not writing about me as a guy in LA who's good with computers who wants to be making movies. Like that's, people say write personal stuff, but like that's not interesting to me. I'm writing about a swordsman who wants to be an official swordsman in a royal court. Like that's interesting to me as a story, but he's still with that theme of like, I'm trying to figure out how to do what I want to do for a living, and it's hard, even though this is like a medieval story or something like that. So I find that element always relevant. So it's something that shows up for me, but yeah.
So you take the things that you're working with and you translate it into a new kind of story. I think the best writers do that kind of thing. Yeah.
I think so. It's a tough thing to come about of like what you're able to translate, but I think each person figuring out how to write what they want to explore, regardless of like what it is, I think is really the way to go. A lot of writers get the advice of write what you know. And I think that's often bad advice, or at least advice for people with no imagination, because what that may mean, again, in my case, if it's like, oh, well, I know what it's like to be a writer in LA who wants to be making movies, so I'm going to write about a guy who is a writer in LA. And like, where's the imagination in that? Like, some people are really good at that and can do that and turn it into something very inventive. I'm not saying don't do that, but that doesn't work for me.
Right.
So I think the better advice is write what you want to explore, because, Tolkien wasn't, if he was writing what he wasn't writing about people being professors of language. He wrote about hobbits and dragons and wars for the One Ring. Like, did he know about that stuff? No, but he wanted to explore themes of friendship in extreme conflict and a world where hobbits and dragons and orcs and elves exist. So I think that's, and even if you're not telling fantasy stories, like, what do you want to explore? Write about that. And that, I find that freeing in a way where like, I don't need to have an agenda. I'm not trying to tell a story where I'm putting my politics on it. It's just like, I want to explore a story where what happens if there's this hacker and he has this idea for a thing, but it gets at it. Like, I don't know. I want to explore computer hackers and like, I like that idea, but I also want to explore relationships, and you put those together and you start exploring them and see what story comes out of it.
Oh yeah.
And I think,
that's great.
Yeah. That's a way to not put pressure on a story to do what you think it needs to do.
Right. Yes. Cause sometimes it wants to go in a direction you don't want it to go in, or you didn't expect.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask one last thing. You said on your Podmatch profile that you love Shakespeare. So I wanted to know, which is your favorite Shakespeare play? Or do you have more than one favorite?
Oh, that's not a fair question.
I know. When people ask me, what's your favorite movie? Well, which genre are you talking about?
In general, one thing that I love about Shakespeare is that it's one of those things that like, you kind of need to dig for it. It's one of those sorts of treasures where you're not just going to walk into an English class when you're 14 and say, oh, this is great. Yeah. Like it's especially with the way that a lot of people know how to teach it, is a little crusty. So I think the people who love Shakespeare have really taken the time to figure out what is special about this. And I, like everyone else, went through the period of high school. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I can kind of make some sense of it more than the people around me, but I'm like, all right, whatever. There's some fun stuff. I like the sword fights, but whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And then in college in acting classes, like we started to explore the language of it.
Mm-hmm.
Picturesque it was, and the metaphors and the history and the meanings and the like all this stuff. Like I'm a nerd, so I'm getting to research stuff, but it's exciting and there's a good drama. Like there's all these things. Like, oh, okay. It's a wide playground to play in. And through that, I was in college and doing theater for years afterwards, just being able to perform in a lot of plays, discovering more pieces of them. So I have like favorites that I've performed in and favorites of reading. I've been in As You Like It a couple times. And that just, I think that shows the bomb. It's so funny. Like, and like funnier, like a lot of the plays, like it's funnier when you see it than when you read it. So, like it's Shakespeare, these are plays, they're meant to be performed. So being able to see that is important, I think. But in performance, like As You Like It always plays so well. Like it's so clever, it's so funny. Crazy cast of characters. And there's so much you can do with it. I mean, of course, I also love A Midsummer Night's Dream. It's like the standard. It's fun. It's funny. Everyone does it. Like there was one summer where I just went to all the summer Shakespeare I could, and I saw like 5 different productions of Midsummer in the summer. Wow. They're also very different, and like it's hard to mess it up. You can, but there's so much good stuff in there that like it plays so well,
Yeah.
What's funny about that summer is like the 5 different versions I saw, probably the best one I saw was like the smallest theater with the lowest budget, just because it was like just made with love and super theatrical. And then the worst one was actually at the largest theater with an enormous budget, actors with Broadway experience and all the stuff, and it just was boring and dry and heartless. Very cool stage technology of all this stuff coming in, but it wasn't like didn't have the heart. So yeah, I mean there's a lot of ways to go with it, but
that's right. My team teacher Dave is going to direct that play for his master's project at the local community theater that just got started right before the pandemic, and they have space in the mall. They took over space in the mall where stores were leaving, the mall. And so he wants to set it in Haight-Ashbury in the 1960s and use 1960s music and have all those really fun, bright colored costumes and stuff like that. So I can't wait to see it, because he did 12th Night and he did sort of the same thing. It was the actors were all dressed in modern clothing, and he used modern Christmas carols, and it was just really, really fun. So yeah, I can't wait to see what's going to happen with Midsummer Night's Dream. So
that's cool.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to stop this conversation, but it's been almost an hour. And so do you have anything else you want to say? Like, do you have any suggestions of movies for the listeners to see? Or maybe, well, you said you were an avid reader. Do you have any books that you'd like to recommend?
Yes, I would say I'll give 2. One is a book called Essentialism. I'm blanking on the name of the author right now, but I think it's pretty easy to find. It's essentially about focus. And it was a really good read about how to say no to things and remove some stress from your life just by figuring out like, what am I actually trying to do? And I found that incredibly helpful, and I read it like once a year now. And the other one is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Oh, I love that one.
It's like a quick read, but it's so inspiring. It's just, get off your butt and go make something creative. And, anytime I'm really going through something, I just put that on and like, yeah, thanks, Stephen. Like I needed that pep
Yes.
talk.
Yes.
So yeah, I think those are great whenever.
That's cool. Any movies?
Movies. Let's do a kung fu movie since we were talking about it. So Jet Li's movie called Fearless.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Chinese movie, but this is one of my favorite examples. A good kung fu movie that people should watch because like it's just a really good drama.
Mm-hmm.
But it also happens to have a bunch of martial arts in it. It's not like, hey, let's just go to random action scenes, which is what the comedies are what a lot of people think of. Like it's a solid drama based on Chinese history that has a ton of martial arts in it as well. But it's a solid movie, very very well done, very moving story.
Yeah, I liked that one too. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I'm into historical dramas. So that one was interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Gedaly, thank you so much for being my
You're
guest.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. You'll find the show notes for this episode at my website, Sage Woman Chronicles at sagewoman.life. You can leave a comment there. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.